What I'd like to do at this shot is two things: reinforce the setup and then show you the difference between shooting with variable filters and fixed filters. First, the setup. I'd like to have a setup that gets you up and going quickly. So have your gear conveniently placed, ready to go, know what you'll need, and we're ready. I'm going to use 2 stacked fixed ND filters. Now, the disadvantage of using the fixed filter is that it's always dark, so it's a little bit difficult when you're using a lot of ND to compose. The other problem is that it can be sometimes so dark that your autofocus won't work. And the real problem comes in if you have to remove it to compose and put the filters back on, you might change settings. So not only is it slower, but you run the risk of changing your focal length or your focus. So let's put it into manual mode, ISO 50 at f/22. We're going to try to get a 30-second exposure. So that means the only thing that we can really change here is the ISO or the aperture. It looks like all I can do is get to about 15 seconds with this shot. I don't have enough fixed ND to go any longer. Let's go ahead with the shot, using the cable release to reduce vibrations. Remember to always turn off that image stabilization. It'll hunt for any motion and make your shot actually blurry. Good exposure. Now let's try that again, but using the variable filter. The variable filter only has a maximum 8 f-stops of light reduction, so that's not going to be enough. So what we're going to do is stack our 5 on top of that. That'll give me from 8 to 13 stops of reduction. The setup is very similar. We're still in manual mode, we're still at ISO 50, we're still at f/22. But the advantage is I can dial open the filter so that I can easily see through the lens. Then, once I've got the shot composed, I'll stop the filter down. We're all set to take the exposure at 30 seconds. It won't autofocus, so I'm going to put my thumb over the eyepiece. There it autofocuses. We're shooting these sea lions at 30 seconds, and we're hoping they'll actually move a little bit, creating a little feeling of life. Just a little bit overexposed, so I'm going to turn that neutral density filter down a little bit, easily adjusting the exposure. Now we're just going to wait for another set of waves and take another shot. The reason I'm waiting for waves is I'd like a nice contrast between the fixed rocks and the animals and the white waves below. So here we go. Remember to always use your loop and to check your histogram for the correct exposure. Looks good. The primary difference between the fixed and the variable filter is that you can more easily adjust your exposure and you can open it up for composing and focusing. It's well worth the extra money that you'll pay for the variable filter. Okay, I've stopped at this shot because the water attracted my attention. It's really flat today, and that means that if we go really long on our exposure, we can get a nice glassy shot. So what I'm going to do is start at about 60-second exposure. Whenever you're shooting over 30 seconds, it presents a few small problems. The first is it's so bright today that I have too much light. I'm using 2 neutral density filters, giving me about 13 f-stops, but it's not enough, so I've added a 3rd filter. This presents a small vignetting problem if I go wide, but fortunately for this shot it's very tight, not a problem. The second thing is, in over 30 seconds, we'll need to shoot in bulb mode, and we'll need to use a locking shutter release. Whenever I hold the shutter down and lock it, the shutter will remain open, and releasing it closes the shutter. Now the third problem is, how do we meter something that's 60 seconds when our camera will only meter to 30 seconds? Let me show you how we do that. We get a correct exposure at 30 seconds, and then I underexpose by 1 f-stop. And now what I'll do is compensate by doubling my exposure time from 30 to 60, giving me again the correct exposure. So let's take our first shot at 60 seconds and see how it looks. looks pretty good, but it's just a little dark. So I'm going to increase that to 75 seconds for this next shot. For the 75-second exposure, we're going to use our shutter release. We're in bulb mode, and we're going to use the iPhone for our 75-second timer. Here we go. Much better. And we've got the smooth water look that we were looking for. So this is an example of shooting over 30 seconds and getting a longer exposure to provide a very smooth, glassy water.